I wanted to start maybe from shifting a little bit the lens and talking about smart cities and smart communities, not as the field of technology per se, but as a field that you frame from a perspective of user-centered experience. And again, city it has its own user and it's a resident. Is anybody who lives there, is anybody who interacts with the city. And in essence, for me, the smart city or smart community is a combination of good policies and good technologies that are responsive to the needs of the residents, the needs of the user, so to say, and they enable the decision makers to listen to those people and to act, and therefore to really respond to the needs and the pain points of the people who live in the city or community.
Hi, Smart Community friends. Welcome back to the summer series here on the Smart Community podcast. As you know, we're taking a little break from new content over the Australian summer holidays, and instead we're sharing the replays of a few of our all-time favourite episodes. This week, we're sharing my interview with Katya Petrikevich from episode 231, which was released in May of this year, so 2021. In this episode of the Smart Community podcast, I have a great conversation with Katya, the co-founder and international director of two companies. Participation Factory, a consultancy that mainstreams participation and data-driven approaches into governance and process design, and Civic Port, a database helping connect cities, towns, and other governing institutions with the Civic Tech companies. We begin our discussion talking about Katya's background, her passion for human rights, specifically women's rights and inclusivity, and Katya tells us what a smart community is to her. Katya then shares with us her insights into the upward trend of participation, community engagement, and inclusivity. We discuss Civic Technology as a tool for dialogue and communication with the community before Katya shares with us the projects her two companies are currently working on. We finish our conversation talking about the importance of systematic and continuous participation with communities. Katya tells us about the City Coordinators of Prague project, and finally we discuss the growth of the emerging trends of living data, participation, and civic tech. I also have an update from Katya. Since the time of the recording, she has been engaged in various projects in the Czech Republic and abroad, including supporting the delivery of the Conference of the Future of Europe as a facilitator of the panel Stronger Economy, Social Justice, Jobs, Youth, Sport, Culture and Education, and Digital Transformation. And in addition to this, she is currently serving as a member of a Civic Tech review committee organized by People Powered. Her work as its member supports the development of the Digital Participation Platforms Guide and provides assessment to the best digital participation platforms. She has also presented at several events and provided expertise on the topics of public participation, community engagement, and citizen data, including at the Tech Camp Chile and local labs in 2021. We'll be sure to get Katya back on the show in the future for a full update on what she's been up to and how our thinking has progressed since this conversation. In the meantime, as always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Katya. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I am very well, and I'm very excited to have you on the podcast. So thanks so much for joining me.
No, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for asking. That was super exciting to get the invitation to your podcast.
Yeah, well, let's just jump straight in. And can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
Absolutely. So the background, it's a story. I'm originally from Russia, but I'm now based in the Czech Republic. And before that, I've done quite a bit of traveling, living in other countries. I've stayed for a few years in the US and then France. And my academic background is connected to those countries. I studied political science in the US and I studied human rights in France. And everything has sort of led me to where I am at the moment. I'm generally interested in the question of people-centered governance in democracy building and innovation, especially coming from a country that has so much trouble with it. So especially when I was studying in France and getting more into questions of inclusion and consensus-driven decision-making, I came across an organization that was based in the Czech Republic, or still is based in Czech Republic, and that focuses on civic tech specifically to include people in decision-making processes. And this is basically how I explored the whole field of public participation, citizen engagement, and I've stayed here for 6 years now. So this is a little bit of a journey that I'm still on.
No, we're all on a journey, aren't we? Never ends. So tell us what you're really passionate about.
Outside of all of this, as I said, a lot of my interests come from the background that I mentioned, political science and human rights. And if we're not talking purely about the work of public participation, I do quite a lot of things connected to human rights, specifically women's rights, LGBTQ plus inclusion. I myself author a few blogs in Russian and in English on those issues. So that's something that I'm doing outside of the job, but also something that I'm trying to bring in my work because it's oftentimes overlooked. And that is oftentimes much needed, not oftentimes all the time much needed.
Yeah. And I mean, so the reason I asked you on the podcast, because participation is so important and participation of all groups is so important. And I wanted to, I guess I love getting different people on the podcast, bringing people into this conversation, particularly ones that are interested in bringing more people into the conversation of all conversations as a community. So I think it's really important. So love having you here. So let's just jump in. What is a smart community to you?
So that's a great question. When I was thinking about your podcast and how my expertise can be useful for any of the listeners, I wanted to start maybe from shifting a little bit the lens and talking about smart cities and smart communities, not as the field of technology per se, but as a field that you frame from a perspective of user-centered experience. And again, city it has its own user and it's a resident. Is anybody who lives there, is anybody who interacts with the city. And in essence, for me, the smart city or smart community is a combination of good policies and good technologies that are responsive to the needs of the residents, the needs of the user, so to say. And they enable the decision makers to listen to those people and to act, and therefore to really respond to the needs and the pain points of the people who live in the city or community. So smart city is much more than just technology. It's a combination of the tools, of policies, methods, and just the political will to actually listen to people.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, like, moving forward into the future, like the work that you do, have you seen that more people are getting involved in the conversation, or are we, not necessarily smart communities, but just communities in general, are you seeing more participation across the board, or is that something you're still trying to really push? Is it still a new kind of thing in, I guess, the Czech Republic, or what you're seeing?
Yeah, so I want to say it's an upward trend, but it would be, I guess, overly optimistic to say that it's like a steady upward trend across the board everywhere. There are, of course, even in the Czech Republic, there are, of course, some like outliers that have been doing this for years already, that are strong pioneers, that are strong voices, and they see the value. But it's not universal across the Czech Republic. However, given the political climate right now, and especially with the conversations that, for example, were happening in the US around the last elections and around the BLM, Me Too movement, there is more and more understanding that we need to listen to people, that we need to engage people to avoid any crisis, to avoid any problems. And then, of course, on top of this, you have the whole COVID crisis, where the governments were hit in the face with the realization of a few things. One, that they need a lot of information from people. They actually need to understand what's going on and react quickly. So that's one thing. And the other thing, they start to realize that the way they've been operating is outdated, even in the sense of technology, with the over-reliance on physical spaces, with the over-reliance on in-person communication that is, again, it's inclusive in a way because online space excludes some people, but at the same time, it doesn't include all. So there is definitely an understanding that things need to change and that the governments should get more open. They should get more more technological in a way, but it's still a little bit of a struggle, and I still worry a bit that there might be a slip down once the COVID is over with technology. But the trend is there, and I think it will stay. But it's always a little bit of a struggle.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I guess you talked about technology being a tool. What kind of things that maybe people don't think about very often of using technology to increase participation? Is there any, I guess, even trends or project you've been working on that use technology as a tool to, serve the population? Or are you seeing that people are just using the technology at their fingertips, and it's maybe the response to that and how we respond to how people are using those different tools?
So I think definitely people are used to technology by now. Even when we have conversation about, for example, engagement of the elderly people, the conversation is oftentimes too pessimistic. Actually, older people, at least in the Czech Republic and in Europe, are using technology more and more. They have more access to it. They have higher levels of literacy that a lot of people assume they have. But it's important to separate the social media and the technology that we use every day and the new emerging civic tech field that is facilitating participation and specifically political and political interaction with the governments. And the main difference is that social media provides space that doesn't provide the structure and doesn't really connect to the government directly. And this is the tools that we're used to have. They create a lot of noise. There are a lot of echo chambers, so they are oftentimes not as effective. At the same time, there is more of a trend right now, at least in the Czech Republic, to use civic tech because it provides space and opportunity for structured dialogue with the citizens. By dialogue, I don't mean only just exchange of information, but also cooperation, co-decision, co-designing of different solutions. And so there is definitely a trend towards using social media on one hand for specific purposes, but when it comes to structured participation, civic tech is becoming a thing and more governments are using it. And as for specific projects, I actually would struggle to say which ones we're implementing that we're not using tech in, because it's a very common understanding that you need to use tech. Again, not as the only thing that will facilitate and solve any problems, but as a tool that will help to reach more people, because it does. You can't expect everyone to be able to come to an in-person meeting, especially nowadays. So technology becomes really a must in those processes.
Well, let's jump to you. And can you give us a bit of an overview on your companies, Participation Factory and Civic Port?
Yes. So I'm a co-founder and international director of both companies. So I'm in charge of any international projects or any international partnerships. And as I said, I started working in the field of public participation in the Civic Tech company. And what I realized in the course of my work, Civic Tech companies, they create a specific solution that is suited for specific type of processes. And oftentimes there is an incentive to push for this particular process on the community, regardless of whether it really fits. And so my interest within the company at the time was to expand it into more of a consulting model so that we really help cities to understand what it is their need, and then if our tool actually fits, to offer it. And so when I and my business partner started Participation Factory, that was our main focus. And in essence, Participation Factory provides consulting on how to build a good participation process. We design those processes. We help people to implement them. We help build the capacities of the implementers so they know anything connected to the field of participation, from social media management to, conflict mitigation and in-person meetings. And we also evaluate existing processes. So if the city, for example, is running a public participation consultation every year, they can approach us and see how they can improve on this. And when it comes to Civic Port, we still use a lot of Civic Tech. We rely on it a lot. And Civic Port is basically a knowledge hub that is currently monitoring over 150 Civic Tech solutions from the Czech Republic and the EU. And we use it as a database from which we can provide communities with a short list of the best fit solutions. So Civic Port is the company that walks in the door, helps the communities understand what they need from the tech and why they need it, because oftentimes we're approached by people who say, oh, we just want to use tech, and they don't know why, and they don't know what processes they can benefit from the tech. So we help them to identify those needs and requirements, and then to give them a short list of the tools that can be of the best use. And this is, in essence, our work.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I guess like having those two different streams, so then you can best serve, your clients, but also then, I guess recognizing that the tech side of things is, like, I talk a lot about smart communities and people often bring it back to the people, which is so important. But I think we can't, like you said earlier, you can't forget about the tech. You can't just ignore the tech because it's there, whether we like it or not, and it will continue to grow. So if we don't include what we want to include and then in the process exclude what we want to exclude, then, or if we don't understand what we want to include and exclude, then I think like you were talking about earlier, that unstructured approach happens. Because I think often people, maybe not in the engagement field, kind of think that it's this kind of unstructured thing where we just ask the community, oh, tell us what you want. Okay, yep, great, we'll put that in. Yep, whatever. But it's actually very structured because, you can't get the answers that you want if you don't ask the right questions. And you can't get the answers that you want if you don't give them the right tools to tell you what you need to know. And you can't get the right answers if you don't know what the outcome you want is, and not the final outcome of the project, but what you want from that engagement piece, because otherwise people go, oh, this is confusing. Oh, I don't feel comfortable here. I don't feel safe sharing my information because these people don't know what they're doing, or whatever the case may be. So I think both those sides are really important.
This is exactly how our thinking goes. And it can be really frustrating to see from the decision makers that we were talking to exactly this reaction of like, oh my God, like we're just opening the door and they're going to hijack the conversation. They're just going to flood us with irrelevant information. And it's also really frustrating to see how decision makers oftentimes infantilize the citizens in the sense that, oh, they don't know what they actually want. They don't know the information that would be useful. And we actually work also with the young people. From the age of 10, we have experience of doing school participatory budgeting, where kids would create the proposals on how they want to improve the school, and then they get to campaign and vote on it. And even at this age, that was like one of the first things that people would say, they're just 10 years old. What are they going to propose? They would just want, I don't know, to buy chocolate or toys or whatever. And at the end, young kids were suggesting things like improving water fountains at school, buying solar panels, creating a small botanical garden. So even at the age of 10, people already know what they want. And if you give them the right tools, if you guide them through the process and you help them build the capacity, they produce incredible outcomes. They produce ideas that are just mind-blowing and amazing and benefit not just them, but the community, whatever the community is, the school or the city.
That's so interesting. And I have heard from other people like similar things where, they've come up with these great ideas. But also if you bring them in at that early stage, then they get used to being involved in these conversations. So you're basically growing, active civilians, right? Active people that want to be, that think that they can, or that know, or maybe they think first and then they know that they can actually have an influence on, they can participate in the civic environment. And I think that's really, really important, because if we continue down a path where people don't think that they have a say, then we won't get the information they want. We just get negative, backlash or whatever, which some people might just go, oh, well, yeah, who cares if there's a negative comment on Facebook? Let's just keep moving. But actually you break down trust. It breaks down all these things that we really need to be able to have great communities. And I think that's really important, that some of these steps might seem really small and even trivial, but actually in the long run, they build into these monumentous things that are really important to the social fabric of our communities.
Totally. I think you just touched on the question of accountability. And again, speaking from experience, doing bad participation or not following up, or as you said, just ignoring this one comment on Facebook, it not only damages the trust in this one particular process, it damages the trust in the concept of participation in the local governance. So doing bad participation is worse in a way than not doing participation at all. Because as soon as you launch the participation, as soon as you invite people to contribute, you are building a certain expectation. You're starting to build the relationship of trust. And once you break it, it's really hard to rebuild it. So any participation has to be systematic. It has to be really well thought through. And it fosters the sense of trust that is unfortunately really, really easy to break. And it just makes me think that also participation is often perceived as a one-time off thing. Like you do this project once in 2 years and then you forget. And it's not that, unfortunately. Again, if we're coming back to this whole idea of the smart city, as I said, it's about understanding the needs and the pain points of the people, and participation helps you to do that. And those needs change, they evolve, and they are never static. So you need to have this process as continuous as possible. And this is why one of the trends or something that we're working on right now is to help cities and communities to create what we call city participation systems that help cities to build infrastructure that makes public participation, use of civic tech a part of their DNA, so that there is this continuous work together with the citizen and making their communities better.
Yeah, I think that's also really important. And I think in smart communities as well, like I often talk about, like, it's a radical shift in what we expect from, or what on both sides, that the community will get this level of engagement that they've never experienced before. So at first it will be, quite a shock potentially, and they might go, oh, what's this? I don't trust it. And then on the client side, like local government or whoever's delivering this, there's lots of things that I need to consider, like you just spoke about, which is that it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing thing. It's a role that somebody has ongoing, and not just to answer complaints or whatever, but being active and in the strategy of how we're actually going to do this. And it shifts and it changes, like you said. But I think that will be one of the really key kind of outcomes of smart communities if we get this right, is that people will know that they have this opportunity to participate and will engage in a way that, I guess, they'll know that they have some kind of say. So then they will actively participate in these, not even just projects, but in the community, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be, I think, we talked about formal structures and that type of thing, but then that leads to, okay, well, how do I get more involved in my community? Maybe I can do something, maybe I can volunteer here, or I can get involved in, I don't know, some kind of working group or something like that. I think it all kind of rolls in.
Yeah, it definitely helps, like, to respond to what you were saying at the beginning, and with creating a healthier community where participation is really a part of it, is really a, let's say, threefold process, as you said. One of it is institutional. You need to build the institutional support. You need to build infrastructure. You need to have this one person, as you said, who knows what's happening, who knows what process can benefit from participation, and who's in charge of the agenda. Because let's admit it, if you drop it randomly on someone who is already overloaded with the work in the city hall, it's just not going to be top of the priority list for them. And so it's going to always come out flat. And then at the same time, you can have programs that help children and young adults to develop the set of skills that make them more active, that help them to build the knowledge of how to participate, again, as you said, formally and informally. And at the same time, you help the community to get used to it. It's also very important, as you said, at first, it can be a bit confusing, it's too much, or it's something too new and people don't trust it. Again, this is why you need to plan participation well. You need to start from small little things that people feel comfortable doing, or provide them with a variety of different things they can do within one project, let's say, that different people with different capacities or different skills can participate in. And yeah, all of it helps to create a more connected city, a more connected community where everybody feels a sense of ownership and everybody feels a sense of inclusion and empowerment that allows them to volunteer more, or to makes them feel like they are actually co-responsible for things that are happening in their city. And it definitely helps to build the social bonds that are required for it.
Is there any projects that you'd like to share with us? Maybe some lessons learned from any exciting projects you've been working on?
Definitely. We're one of the, I would say, flagship projects for us in the last year is a project that we call City Coordinators of Prague. It's the project that's been conceived by the Institute of Planning of Prague, and it basically a pilot for a city participation system. So the plan is in the next 2 years to test in 12 districts of Prague how it would look like if you could have a participation coordinator and participation a part of the agenda and the daily operations. So our role in this process is to give the know-how to all of those coordinators that are working on those district levels, and to help them design and implement the first participation processes. So we help them run the diagnostics to understand what are the challenges that they have institutionally and on the community level, and to choose from a wide palette of different types of processes, which ones fit them best. So it's an incredible learning experience for them, because that's, of course, a lot. They really need to absorb everything there is about public participation, about civic tech, and about their community, to be honest, because they walk in with some assumptions and conceptions and some data, but of course not as robust as they get through participation. And it also is a very interesting learning experience of us. It's a project of the large scope. It's a project that is of high complexity because, again, we're really getting into this governance structure that is oftentimes very rigid, that doesn't really want to change. And it's disruptive because, and this is what our coordinators are experiencing, there is some level of frustration from their side because they feel like they're not listened to enough, or they don't have enough power and they really want to do more. And at the same time, there's frustration on the side of those local district city halls that are frustrated with a lot of changes, and it's understandable. It's creating new workflow, it's creating the new procedures, and it feels overwhelming at times. So we're now learning, how do you achieve this result where participation is a part of daily operations, and how do you make this process of change as smooth as possible? And this is really exciting, and it has really great potential. I would love to see it finishing and us rolling it out to the rest of Prague, and then other cities in Czech Republic picking it up.
That sounds really interesting. And yeah, thanks so much for bringing up some of those pain points too, because often, when you ask people about projects, we just talk about the exciting things, but it's so true. And with smart communities as well, governance is so important. And whether you're pushing against particular governance structures or you're working within it, but you're changing workflows, exactly like you said, those things are real and they can make or break a project a lot of the time. And I think we don't think about them enough until they're happening on our project, or maybe we don't, when they are having our project, we're not necessarily thinking about how much influence they're having on the total outcome. So yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, because I think it's really important, and it's not just going to go, oh yeah, well, this is a good thing to be doing, therefore it just happens, right? Like project management and like all these things that are quite, mundane and boring, you need to get through them. And that's, this isn't just flashy whiz-bang things happening all the time. And like you have to there's still drudgery, I guess, in enacting these projects. But yeah, then you see the outcomes and then makes it all worth it in the end, hopefully.
Exactly. It makes it, that's what I'm saying. Like, it makes it all worth it. And the pain and the struggle and the sweat, it's definitely all worth it. But I just don't want, it's healthy to walk in the project knowing what the obstacles will be and what the challenges are. It helps you to assess better. It helps you to manage it better. And at the end of the day, from our experience, it's about being able to communicate the value so that people understand that their inconvenience and discomfort now is fine because they're going to get the great benefits afterwards.
It's worth it in the end, both sides.
Exactly. Like it's not to say that what we're doing is great for us and whatever their experience is irrelevant. It's more about to say, I'm sorry for the inconvenience now, but here is X, Y, Z reasons why it's good for you and the community. So let me help you get through this painful period as fast as possible so that we can start building something really amazing together.
Yep. And you frame it so nicely. Okay, let's zoom to the future. What do you think the emerging trends are that people aren't talking about enough?
I think we already touched on them a little bit. And I'll just be summing up what I said here and there. So I think that data from communities will become essential in decision-making processes. I see that the value of it is becoming more and more obvious. And I'm talking about the kind of data that comes from citizens and different stakeholders, not just once a year during a census or something like this, but just a living data will become a part of the daily operations. Then I think another really interesting thing, and for example, the project that I mentioned with Prague is trying to tackle it, and this is what I'm seeing as a trend that is going to continue, is this institutionalization of know-how and participation and civic tech knowledge, so that all of it is stored within the city halls. And because it will become a part of daily operations, there is a need for it, there is a hunger for it. And as you said, the situation right now, politically and with the COVID-related things, are showing that the cities and communities need to know it. They need to be able to do it themselves, even at the very basic level. And of course, I also said that tech is essential. There is no way we can avoid technology, even in the countries where technology, like penetration of the internet is low, it's still rising. It's still the trend towards spreading more and more. So civic tech specifically, I think, is gonna be uptaking everywhere, exactly because, as I mentioned, it provides an opportunity to create structured discussions that are managed, that are meaningful, that are geared towards consensus rather than radicalization of the opinions. It's geared towards finding the common ground and a common solution. And I think it will be more and more normal to use civic tech, not just in the sense of how many tools you use it, but how intensively you use this one particular tool. Because right now, what we see oftentimes, communities or cities, they purchase a civic tech solution for one specific project with a 1-year license, and then for the rest of the year, they don't use it for anything at all. And right now we see an interest in like, okay, we have this amazing tool. How do we use it more? How do we get more value? And I think the intensity of use of civic tech is just going to continue to grow.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. It's like the term in infrastructure is like sweating the asset, right? When we don't necessarily need to buy a new thing each time we do something, but what else can this tool do for us, for our community? It's really important. It's been really great to chat with you. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really exciting to share all of this and to bounce back a few ideas, and but also to hear the validation of the work that we're doing and that you're sharing the same experiences and the same thoughts.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that too, because, I'm sitting here in regional Australia and nothing you're saying is completely foreign to me. Like, it's not like, oh, that's a weird thing that's happening over there. That never happens in Australia. We do all these things, whatever. I mean, obviously there's nuances and differences, but I think when it comes down to it, each community is unique, but there's some fundamentals that we share because we're all human beings at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. No community is the same, but at the same time, the logic behind it and the value in doing the things that we're doing is the same across the board.
Well, I just have one last question. How can people connect with you?
So I think the easiest way to connect with me would be my LinkedIn, and I can share the link with you later, or my email address. I'm free to share it with you. I'm attempting to have a Twitter presence, but unsuccessfully so yet. So I'm not going to share it yet.
That's totally fine. I also I'm not as big on Twitter as I am on LinkedIn is my jam, but I do have a slight Twitter presence. But yes,
I have a very static reading Twitter that I use for checking out what other people are doing and sharing. I'm like, this is awesome, guys.
Totally. Well, yes, we can put the links in the show notes so people can click away and find you. But thank you again, Katya, for coming onto the podcast. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me. Again, that was a pleasure talking to you, and I'm excited to see what else you're going to be doing.
Awesome. That's great. It's been so great to chat. Let's say goodbye. And yeah, I look forward to talking again soon. See you later. Bye.
Bye.
The Smart Community podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're looking for support in podcast strategy and production, workshop design and facilitation, or communication and media advisory, get in touch. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcasts. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.